Welcome, everyone. Happy to see you all joining us this day. I know we're all joining from different time zones. My name is Adaeze Okorie, and I'm a fellow for DOWA, Doing Good Work in Africa. And it's my pleasure to introduce you and welcome you to our third webinar, Africans and Technology, Using Tech in Africa as a Means to Develop Grassroots Solutions. Today's webinar will consist of a video presentation, panelist introductions by our moderator, Nekesa Were, a featured panelist discussion, and a live Q&A with all of our attendees and panelists. The webinar will conclude with key remarks from DOWA's founders, Ola and Emiola. Thank you all for joining us today. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, Nekesa Were, Director of Strategies. As the Director of Strategy at AfriLabs, Nekesa is responsible for developing and executing the strategy that ensures a thriving innovation economy in Africa, driven by the power of the AfriLabs community. AfriLabs is a growing network of 225 innovation hubs in 47 African countries. For the last decade, Nekesa has worked at the heart of Africa's technology and innovation ecosystem. Nekesa was previously the managing director of iHub Nairobi, where she led an open innovation culture that was integral in ensuring quick maturity of the Kenyan innovation ecosystem. She currently serves on the boards of Africa Tech and Creatives Group, Creatives Garage, and Missing Child Kenya.
Thank you, Adaeze, for the very lovely introduction. Well, I'm so glad and so privileged to be hosting this, or rather moderating this panel with the team. And I expect it's going to be a very lively conversation. We have great panelists lined up, and I will be introducing them very shortly. But first, just a little bit about our conversation today, using tech in Africa as a means to develop grassroots solutions. The last 10 years also have been, they've seen an increase in the number of homegrown solutions. The solutions have contributed to improved infrastructure, connectivity, and these cases, the infrastructure and the connectivity as well, have seen the space. We've seen a lot of democratization of the space, where we have a lot more innovation happening, a lot more access to resources, a lot more access to service delivery from public sector and so on. And really all of this can be attributed to improved infrastructure that we've seen over the last 10 years and perhaps 20 to 10 years. So with improved infrastructure comes the growing need for tech talent. And as Africa competes on the global scale, so must its talent. The talent also has to compete on a global scale. And the market, we've noticed, will settle for no less than world-class talent. And it's not just world-class talent, it also will settle for no less than world-class products. But even as we solve for solutions and export them, we also spend a lot of our time introspecting and working within Africa, where majority of us are based. And so as we're building those innovations, we're building solutions for our communities first. We're building for challenges that we have, that our families have, that our communities, that our countries have, and several factors, including connectivity, again, infrastructure, and policies sometimes make that quite difficult. So this panel is going to explore what Africa is doing, or what Africa can do better, what Africans are doing, and what Africans can do better to use tech as a means to develop grassroots solutions. But before we get into the panel, let's take a look at this video that will help us set the stage, showcasing our ecosystem as it is today.
From this image, you can see that currently there are an estimated 643 active hubs in continental Africa. The hubs are located in places like Egypt, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Nigeria. This diagram also divides sections of Africa into categories between co-working, accelerator, innovation hub, and incubator. This image provides data on the top venture deals in Africa in 2019, such as companies like InterSwitch, Andela, and Lori. Finally, this last image shows the amount of money funneled into tech companies in Africa, coming close to $2 billion.
Thank you very much for that, just really setting the stage for the conversation today and what the ecosystem looks like now. It's now my privilege to introduce the panelists who will join me today. And in no particular order, first David Tusubira is a tech entrepreneur. He holds a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from Makerere University. David is a hardware developer with a background in robotics. He's currently the CTO and co-founder at Innovex, which is using IoT, that's the Internet of Things technology, to promote access to solar energy in sub-Saharan Africa. David has been shortlisted for the 2020 Royal Academy of Engineering £25,000 Africa Prize for Engineering Innovation. Welcome, David. Our next panelist is Becky Sadiq, who's the Director of Marketing at Gebeya Incorporated. Gebeya is a Pan-African online talent marketplace with more than a decade of, Becky has more than a decade of experience in marketing and communications. She's passionate about leveraging technology and storytelling to maximize investment and engagement in Africa and among its diaspora. Our third panelist, Jinmi Oluwanuiga, is the Connectivity Program Manager at Facebook. He's connecting the next billion people to the internet in the Middle East and Africa through Express Wi-Fi. Before joining Facebook, Jinmi delivered the groundbreaking $300 million Main One submarine cable to Nigeria, Ghana, and Cameroon. A former national deputy coordinator for the Alliance for Affordable Internet, Jinmi published Nigeria's first ever national broadband plan and continues to strongly advocate for policy and regulatory support and action. He holds a master's and bachelor's degree in systems engineering, both from Cornell University, London. So welcome very much to all my panelists. I will ask David, if you would please start us off by telling us just a little bit more about your product.
Thanks a lot, Nekesa, for the introduction, and thanks for giving me this opportunity. So our product is called Remote. Remote is an IoT platform that is used to promote the access to solar energy by connecting the hardware to the solar systems, collecting data about the solar systems, and helping them last longer. So basically, our technology makes off-grid solar systems more sustainable.
Would you please just tell us a little bit more about the prize that you have been shortlisted for? I'm curious to hear a bit more about that as well.
Yeah, so the Africa Prize for Engineering Innovation is an annual prize by the Royal Academy of Engineering. I was shortlisted. So normally they'll take applications from about over 100 companies and startups, and they'll have a shortlist of 16 companies only from the entire continent. So I was shortlisted for the 2019-2020 program. So it involves, of course, it's a prize where if you win the whole thing, you get to take home £25,000, and finalists get to take £10,000. But that's not really what it's about. It's about the training program where you go through entrepreneur and technical mentoring and guidance and training to help make you a better entrepreneur and help you grow your business.
Great, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you on the panel. Becky, I, of course, having been in the tech and innovation space for quite a while now, I'm very familiar with Gebeya, doing incredible work across the continent. But for the benefit of anyone that's hearing about it for the first time, please tell us a bit more about what the organization does.
Sure. Thank you, Nakasa. And yes, good to see you again. As was covered in the brief intro about myself, Gabeya is an online talent marketplace company. And what that means is that we have a network of talent that we have connected with that has either gone through our training programs or that we've scoured the continent for to find the best of African talent, as our tagline says. And what that means is that we have identified, tested, interviewed, required a project presentation, and finally accepted and onboarded any talent that is in our network before they even have any kind of a connection with customers. So yes, of course, our talent includes people with tech backgrounds, DevOps engineers, front-end developers, full-stack developers. But we also have expanded to include non-tech skills based on demand, which has been a really exciting opportunity for us, which has included people in the digital marketing space, graphic design, everything that's needed to support especially startups and small businesses. We've worked with customers in spaces as diverse as telecommunications, transportation and logistics, fintech, to provide them and connect them with the best talent to help them grow their businesses and support their development. So at the end of the day, for us, really the goal and the mission is about making this continent competitive and being that bridge between the talent and the opportunities.
Absolutely. And I want to go a little bit into how you do that, the recruitment, where you find the teams and so on. But first, you're a storyteller. And I'm curious to hear, and especially now during the COVID-19 pandemic, I mean, we can't get away from that conversation because it is a situation that we're all facing now. What are some of the most impactful stories, or one of the most impactful stories that you're hearing right now about how Africans are responding, especially in the innovation space? And for anyone on this call, what lessons do you think there are that they could learn from this story?
Yeah, so I would like to cheat and actually slip a few examples in here.
All right.
But I'll start with one that's non-tech related, which is about having seen recycling companies in Tanzania and Uganda taking plastic bottle waste and transforming it into face shields, which was such a cool and inspiring playing out of one man's trash is another man's treasure, you know, kind of quite on its face value. But I think there's a lot of deeper lessons and meanings there. You know, just to respond to the second half of your question about what can those on this call learn. I think it's a perfect example of ingenuity, leveraging opportunity, leveraging what's around you to you know, make something new and productive and useful, and doing something kind of daring that hasn't been done before. I think one kind of nugget of wisdom that I have learned the more time I spend on this continent, because I'm born and raised in the US, but I've spent about the last year and a half in Africa, and this is my like new home, in a sense, new old home, because I do have roots in Ethiopia. But you know, the thing that I keep seeing, the pattern I keep seeing is that, you know, we have a tendency to kind of look at, you know, examples in quote unquote the West, whether that's the US or Europe, and try to emulate or copy and see, you know, what's been done before. But the opportunity that I see that I think is really exciting is that, you know, we can skip steps. We don't have to follow a blueprint. There's the opportunity to actually leap ahead. For example, in a space like mobile money. I spent some time in Nairobi a couple months ago, and you know, was just using M-Pesa left and right, and it's so convenient and easy, and easier than, you know, the experience of paying in a lot of places in the States. And you know, that was it's, you know, an original like innovation that, you know, happened there. You know, here in Ethiopia, we similarly, as I know in some, you know, other countries such as Nigeria, there are a lot of people who are unbanked. And so, you know, if the mindset is that, okay, they need a bank account, they need a debit card, a credit card, all of this, in a very cash-based economy like this, like in Ethiopia, that doesn't necessarily make sense, because if you have a card and you have a merchant that doesn't accept a card, like it doesn't actually benefit you. But everyone has cell phones. And so the opportunity to, create and leverage that technology to, again, kind of skip that step and use mobile payment solutions is really exciting and cool, and and COVID friendly, coincidentally. So yeah, that's just to bring it back. There's opportunity to create, brand new solutions, and starting with, what do we have? What is the reality of the infrastructure, and what is the opportunity, without, worrying about kind of other, what other countries or other continents are up to. Creating our own solutions, I think, is what's really, exciting and impactful.
Yeah, I agree. The thing about the pandemic is that it got a lot of us out of our comfort zones. And a lot of things I feel that perhaps innovators wanted to try with their products, they kind of got to where it was now or never. So if you think about someone in the e-commerce space, for example, I can imagine an e-commerce platform that was thinking about their deliveries and how do we make deliveries to the more informal areas of our city, perhaps. And perhaps it may have been something that they're thinking to do much later on throughout the product development. But I think what the pandemic did was that it kind of catalyzed development of a lot of products that are very useful for people across the African continent. And so you think about the payment systems, like you're saying, I saw a lot more of them crop up during this time, e-commerce platforms, a lot of food vendors, at least in my part of the world, in Nairobi, we had a lot more people surfacing that were selling food, selling healthy food, selling vitamins, and so on. And so it feels as if we just kind of morphed into what the situation presented us with, and we did a pretty good job of it. And if you think about that at a larger scale as well, the fact that we now, as a continent, are thinking more about what can we produce locally, what can we manufacture locally. We're beginning to really think critically about those kind of products and systems. It is a conversation we're already having because of the free trade area that is being implemented soon. But I think the COVID-19 pandemic just made it so, you know what, it's now or never, right? But all this infrastructure that we're building, the free trade area as well comes with this e-commerce platform, because it's now going to be a marketplace for the entire continent. They all need tech talent. And this is where organizations like Gebeya come in, really finding, training that talent, and then deploying. But could you just briefly walk us through how that works? Where do you find them, and what do you teach them?
Sure. Yeah. So where do we find them? So when Gebeya started in 2016, the original model and intent was to utilize the training programs, which were 4 to 5 months, as a pipeline for talent. And yeah, specifically focusing on the tech sector. And that model has evolved and been, again, an exciting opportunity, realizing that there's plenty of experienced, trained talent out there already that doesn't need to, go through an additional several months training in order to have not only the right hard skills, but also we look for soft skills that include communication. And that's why we have a presentation being part of the interview process. So as we've grown, we've really started just within our own networks and have seen that kind of grow exponentially. So right now the growth is very organic, and the opportunity, like you said, is ripe. So what we're really doing is keeping our ear to the ground and seeing also what kind of talent is in demand, so that can inform the way that we go about our searches. So we are, doing a combination of also like hosting our own webinars, which we're actually planning for a few coming up, but we did one over the summer on DevOps engineering, hosted by one of our former talented trainers named John Adams. So, that attracted an audience that was, specifically interested in that topic and, wanting to learn about his journey from his interests like in college, and then now he's a CTO and co-founder of a company called Buymore. So really starting with like kind of organically, both the demand side and within our own networks. So what will soon change, we're going to be launching our MVP version of our platform next year, where there will be a lot more kind of visibility and opportunity for talent who we might not have been able to connect with to join on our platform. So we're trying to tap into networks like She Code Africa, which is, I think they have about 4,000 people in their network of women coders of all ages. So kind of utilizing, kind of going through concentric circles, organizations like Doing Good Work in Africa, just to, make sure that people, whether they're here on the continent or in the diaspora, do have that shared kind of vested interest in really, again, making this continent competitive. So there's a multifaceted approach, I guess, is the best answer to your question on, how do we find our talent? And then secondly, to the piece about, what kind of training do they go through? So once people are part of our network and are our talent, we really, it's not just a transactional marketplace where they then are paired with a client and then, baka, that's it. Sorry, baka means enough in Amharic, in the Ethiopian language. It's really about a relationship, both with the customer and constant communication with them, as well as with the talent. Because for us, at the end of the day, the talent isn't just someone, but they're a representative of us and are part of our community. And so we're actually really invested in their growth and development and upskilling and training as well. So whether that is on the side of the soft skills or, training them in the latest technologies, we're really, again, closely invested in that. And I think that's what really is exciting for me and makes Gabeya different, is that the commitment to not just the talent, but also the clients is very genuine, and really dig our heels in. And at the end of the day, like I said, it's about making this continent competitive. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it absolutely does. And I now want to drop in David, because so David, she's told us a great story about how they are developing talent. And I'm curious if you are finding the talent that you need, or if you need to have a conversation with Becky after this. But before you answer that, you're an entrepreneur, and the world of entrepreneurship sometimes can be, we think it's glamorous. We hear about the exits and so on. But as an entrepreneur, I'm sure there's another story to tell where it's not always glamorous, and sometimes it can actually be challenging, whether it's in just the circumstances of where you're working or finding talent. I don't know. You let us know. But I'm curious. The work that you're doing, it's extremely crucial because you're supplying energy to homes. Yeah. So what systems have you put in place that are enabling you to do that even in challenging times? First of all, what challenges are you facing? But then what systems have you put in place as you're building out your product to make sure that even in those challenges that you can deliver to your clients?
Thanks, Nekesa. So I think the part about entrepreneurship that needs to be talked about the most is the challenges, for sure, because like you said, people glamorize, entrepreneurship. One thing is, of course, the one of the first and biggest challenges that we've faced is, when you start a company, you're doing everything, right? And then there comes a stage where you can't do everything and you have to entrust other people to do things, right?
That's scary.
Yeah, and of course you can't afford like the top professional talent or experienced people. So you're having to hand over or delegate inexperienced people, and you make them do this stuff, and you already have customers, and the customers are on your neck. So delegating work and trusting other people to do the work that you are doing so well is one of the hardest things that hit you when you're starting out, right? So you end up stuck in this position where you're like, should I do everything, or should I just, like, let these people handle this? It's very, very tricky. And so, I mean, as founders, we found ourselves working all night, working many, many hours a day. So, pulling out 70-hour weeks just because you feel like you have to do something yourself for the customer to get the most satisfaction. So that's one of the challenges, and yes, of course, getting talent is also quite tricky. Getting people who are talented and not going to ask you for a lot of money. That's very, very difficult. Going to what you were asking about, these trying times, we were fortunate enough to have some grants that helped us stay afloat. It was really tough because we supply technology that goes onto solar systems, and during the lockdown, people were not installing solar systems, so we're not making any sales. So we had to cut our employees' salaries to half, ourselves to half as well. So that was one of the ways that we managed to stay afloat. The other thing is, we took the opportunity. We said, okay, we're not making any sales. Let's take this time to develop other things. So we spent the lockdown, developing systems and writing a lot of documentation, doing research on the internet, having, online meetings. So we did what we could during the lockdown, but we're very fortunate to have grants. And this is something that you can only do if you're in a business that is doing a lot of social good, So if your business has social impact, then you're going to get a lot of support, and that support will come in handy in tough times. So I would say being in a social venture has definitely come through for us. And of course, yes, learning to trust people and teaching them and guiding them, and helping them learn how to do the work and selling them the vision, as well as what they'll gain from the experience, has also helped us amass a large relatively workforce that has helped us push through.
Great, thank you. We're soon going into the Q&A. I have a couple more questions for the panelists, but I would encourage everyone who's listening in, if you've got any questions, to please put them in the Q&A tab, and we will begin to address them really soon. So David, would you please talk about the local, say, policy landscape, or just what kind of support you get from government, if any? I mean, for solutions like yours, I would imagine for you to really scale, and you can talk as well about your scaling plans, but I can imagine for you to really scale, you're also looking at perhaps government as one of your bigger customers, but is it currently favorable? Do you see that happening? Do you find that perhaps things like connectivity and policy are standing in your way?
So, the one thing that we've learned over time about government and policy is that there are policies actually that favor startups and that will help companies that are starting up thrive. The problem is that information is not in the public domain. It's not easily accessible. So you have to educate yourself with all these opportunities. They're not out there. So the problem that I've realized with policy and the government is, initially we thought, the government doesn't care about us, so we're going to operate and pretend like they don't exist. And that was actually very helpful. Operating like the government doesn't exist is very good because it helps you build your own competence, right? But but as you go on and that there's a manufacturers association that will exempt you of this tax. Do you know that if you're an exporter, you'll be exempted of this tax and that tax? These things are not common knowledge, and they're not written in the newspapers. You have to go digging, find them, but they do exist. Our government has also gone as far as setting up some bit of consortiums for startups that will help us get exposure to other countries, investors. So I would say policy is actually not that bad. There is policy supporting businesses. The problem is the onus is on the businesses to find out what exists in the system that supports them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the other thing that I've noticed happening across the continent is the consolidation of, say, startups or entrepreneurship support organizations. I know in Uganda, for example, there's Startup Uganda. In Kenya, we have Association of Startup and SME Enablers in Kenya. Where else? In Ghana, there's the Ghana Hub Network. I think there's something in Nigeria, something in Tanzania as well. And so a lot of countries are beginning to organize the ESOs, the entrepreneurship support organizations. And the primary reason for this is just what you're saying. There's a lot of policy out there, a lot of it that favors startups or small businesses, and some of it that doesn't. But then you have to look for it, and you have to begin engaging with policymakers to have those conversations and see what you can fix and what you can take advantage of. And if, when talking about how do you engage, and I think that's perhaps some of the questions that people on this call may have is how do you engage? This is actually one of those ways that you engage, to become part of a collective that's amplifying the voice of people like David, or even people like Becky. Because when you talk about ESOs, it's more than just the startups and the hubs. You're also talking about enablers like Gebea and other people that are also trying to nurture talent. So that definitely would be one area that I would encourage for people to plug into. Becky, I want to throw a curveball at you and talk a little bit about the challenges that an organization like Gebea would face. Because yes, we saw in the video and that, we have, for example, 600, over almost 700 hubs. And the reason that these hubs are sprouting up is because we now have a lot more access to connectivity and so on. To some extent, the costs of internet have gone down, but there's still a lot more work to do. So I'm curious, when it comes to nurturing talent, do you see a correlation perhaps with areas that perhaps still have challenges around internet? Is there a correlation between that and where you get your talent, for example? Or what kind of challenges do organizations like you face?
Definitely, connectivity is a challenge and an opportunity. We, as I mentioned, when we first started out as a training institution, we were doing training only in person. We had done some online training, but once COVID hit, all of our training moved online. Similarly, and we've maintained that. And now that is, as you had talked before with mobile payment solutions, that is something that we had planned anyway. And now it's become the default and the model for the training moving forward. Similarly, with the talent kind of scouting and outreach and connecting to talent, we were previously pre-COVID also doing in-person events, to both give exposure to customers and talent, potential talent. We've really leveraged, online, or rather, done, everything digitally now. It's true, yes, connectivity can be a challenge, but at the same time, where the opportunity has been with moving things to online is it's really kind of blurred borders. So prior to COVID, we would, for example, you're in Nairobi, if we're working with a customer there, look for talent just locally. If let's say we had a talent in Ethiopia, this is in the past, we had talent in Ethiopia that we then flew and relocated to Senegal for a few months for a project for a customer there, because we had the right talent, and we didn't at that time have the talent in Senegal. So being physically present was really critical. But David, you talked earlier about cost being a factor. Of course, it's expensive to relocate people. So the kind of shift in mindset of, again, expanding those borders and saying, wait a minute, you're a customer in Nairobi. There's no reason that you only need to, look at talent or consider talent that's local to you, especially since we're all working remotely. And so suddenly that opens the pool and, opens up a lot more opportunities. And I think part of it is that kind of what was accelerated was that shift and that mindset. I think you can agree that, in person, a handshake, eye contact, all these things, these trust building kind of activities are particularly valued in the African context. In my experience, even more so than in the US. So there was definitely, it was a shift and an adjustment, but at the same time, you saw, David, you're talking about, pretending governments don't exist. I was actually, really impressed seeing the way that governments responded, the way that they took their ministry meetings online and made that quick shift to digital. So, bringing it back to your question about challenges, again, it's kind of two sides of the same coin, right? Like challenge and opportunity, in the same like breath. Another challenge, I would say, is speed and kind of adjusting to, like just different paces of the different pace of things. So to give an example, like internally within our company, it's very easy to say, okay, I'll have something done next week, or I'll get back to you next week. But we're really challenging each other to commit more specifically to, 5 p.m. Tuesday, this kind of thing, and like really following through and making like hard deadlines and having a not letting time slip away, and really, being diligent about that. You're right here. It's the dry season in Ethiopia. The sun is out. It's nice to be out and about and kind of just enjoy and relax. But at the end of the day, there's so much work to be done.
Exactly.
There's a tradition here. You have a you have a coffee, in the morning, afternoon. There's very much social traditions of, kind of connecting in leisurely ways and doing business, in this way, where, again, just going back to really thinking about, part of making this continent competitive is being more diligent and almost militant about, sticking to deadlines and making sure things move forward. And so, like it starts with us. And then similarly with our talent, as they go through the process, the vetting process, we have very hard, strict deadlines about when they need to have their tests back, when their project presentation is, when their interviews are. So all of these things. So kind of really setting up that expectation from the get-go before, again, they're even, accepted and onboarding as talent is one. You could call it a challenge or an opportunity. It's just really being clear and setting the expectation from the outset. That's important because then again, once they're representing us, they need to have that same, right mindset when they're dealing with customers.
Absolutely. Great, thank you. I want to give the participants a chance to get their questions in as well. And so I'll turn it over back to Adaeze, and I obviously will be available to take some questions.
Thank you, Nekesa. Well, thank you, Becky and David, for this engaging conversation. And I'm excited to kind of dive deeper into what's already been discussed with the questions that the attendees have posed. So the first one I want to start with is from Lucy. And Lucy says, do your organizations have issues finding talent due to a shortage of STEM majors? I know that in the USA that this is an issue. How do you encourage young people to major in computer science and other related majors when trying to enter this space of technology in Africa?
I think David and Becky might be best placed to take that one.
Maybe I'll just go first.
Yeah.
So it's not that there's a shortage of STEM majors. I mean, there's people graduating in computer science, electrical engineering, left and right. The problem is the experience and the exposure. Because Africa is such a young continent, especially in the space of technology, there aren't that many people who have experience building certain things, So I'll give you an example. In our case, we've struggled hiring software developers and hardware developers because, the software developers, in as much as they've gone to school and learned how to write, code in Python. They've never had to build a platform that does the kind of stuff that ours does, So the problem is really exposure. The only way they could have gotten that exposure is like by interning for I don't know, Google, or like some large organization somewhere outside Africa where they're doing that kind of stuff, or a platform that has 2,000 or 2 million users, So I would say it's not that there's no STEM people. The STEM people are all over the place. They just don't have exposure, and they don't have the way to get the exposure. Right now, the best exposure is startups, because in startups, you go in, you don't know anything, you try to do things and you learn, and that's how you become good, right? So the startups that are coming up in tech are helping people gain that exposure, building fintech platforms that are going to be used by a few million people or a few 100,000 people. It's starting to build up, but there's nowhere these people are going to get this exposure before they get into a startup. So I would say that's the problem.
Yeah, David, that I agree, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think one of the, just again, speaking specifically to Ethiopia, there's not a shortage of people studying these topics, but rather the content is very, what's the word? Not practical, but conceptual. So they don't have the opportunity to have the practical experience of actually applying the things that they've learned. And as you know, technology is always evolving. And so sometimes, maybe what you've learned in school is not relevant by the time you've graduated. And if you've not had the chance to put it into practice, then it's, you have to learn all over again, or, learn through experience. And so I think, where some of the opportunities are outside of internships that maybe students would procure on their own, are in some of these hubs like iLabs at Strathmore University in Nairobi, that give students a chance, an exposure and a chance to kind of incubate and put things into practice. There are ICT parks that have opened here in Addis Ababa, in Dakar in Senegal. They're building a one between the airport and Dakar, that is going to be a combination of like an incubation and training center, where the whole purpose is to kind of meet that, kind of bridge that gap and give students or recent graduates or people even in the industry like a chance to have, maybe they don't. So maybe, one challenge is equipment, I would say. I know here a lot of students, their laptop is, something that is provided by school. And so, if they're not actually in school, they may not have access to it. And so, that is an opportunity for them to have access to not only hardware, but the software, and, the networks. I mean, that is really so critical here. And I think, just maybe Nekesa, you can speak to this. The value of these spaces are the network building and, learning from, what other startups are doing, failing fast, and learning from others, mistakes, and, developing, skill sets that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to quickly chip in there, the value of hubs, I feel fundamentally is always going to be the same. The STEP spaces, as a startup, as an innovator, you can go in, fail fast. It's safe. It's really a safe environment to test stuff out. Very open, and so it doesn't matter where in the world you're from. If you can make yourself to that space, then it's available for you. And then just the networks and the mentorship networks, especially, are found very useful for innovators who make their way into the spaces. But then there's other value that comes in over time. And so with where I was, for example, before my current role at AfriLabs, where while I was at iHub, we kind of would morph based on what the ecosystem was telling us they needed. And so it began with them really needing African research done by Africans for Africa. And so collecting qualitative, quantitative data that innovators could use. And so we came up with our research arm. And then soon after that, we're like, we do the research, and then, there's market research as well. We're taking our products to market without really testing them. And the solution to that was building a user experience lab. And so we soon rolled out a user experience lab. And then we had our consulting arm, which was like a kind of model to, similar to what Gebea has now. It was really just finding talent, training them, and then deploying them either to iHub projects or partner projects as well. And so, yes, you'll really find that across the continent, where there's the core things that hubs bring: the open space, the safe space, the mentorship space. But then it also will morph according to the needs of those individual communities. Absolutely right.
Thank you, everyone. Something to just note on, because another attendee's question was regarding the success examples of support provided to those who are interested in these startups and hubs. And I know you guys have given some examples from your own realms in terms of support via networks, giving access to equipment where that's not the case for those who don't have the opportunity through internships or through their education. Would any of you three be able to give any more examples of positive support that has been given to those who are looking to enter startups and hubs?
Well, I think the other thing that I would add is that the hub ecosystem is just one stop in many stops that any innovator is probably going to make. And so where I've seen it work well is in ecosystems where a kind of pipeline has been created, so that there is, while students are in primary or secondary school, they are already being conditioned towards innovation and entrepreneurship, perhaps in the clubs that they have, or the courses that they're learning, and so on. And once they're done with the high school, they'll go into university, they've taken their options, perhaps it's computer science or whatever it is. And then at that point, while they're still in university, then the hubs begin to engage. And they're basically telling them that once you're done with university and perhaps testing out your product within the environment that the university allows, when you come out into the world, so to speak, one place for you to land could potentially be a hub, and this is what the hubs could offer you. And so there's that linkage that's happening already. And so they'll go into the hubs and they'll be incubated, at some point get accelerated. And then what happens after that? I mean, there's really several options. It could be that they then deploy into the market. It could be that they whatever solution they're building gets incorporated into a large tech organization or not tech organization, basically gets bought out to some. So there's really different paths that they can take. But what's important is that those linkages are formed, and that's where you find that innovators tend to mature and mature well, when the ecosystem kind of builds its way around them, not forgetting governments as well. So it's important for governments as well to begin to engage with hubs, with universities, with the private sector as well. And when that happens seamlessly, then you begin to see a lot of innovations and businesses coming out of ecosystems.
Thank you. All right, our next question is from I'm sorry if I pronounce this incorrectly, but Chile Kangwa, the Action for Nature CEO, who asks, how can our grassroots organizations engage with you and become partners to advance and help your technological products to get to the people that we work with that really need these modern innovations?
Sorry, I'm just reading that again. So the question is, how can they engage, perhaps people on this panel, to use the tech products that the people on this panel are building and have their people within their network use them, if I understand it correctly. Is that what the question is?
I would assume so.
Yeah, okay. what I've found useful is that communities not always wait for the solutions to be developed and then deployed into their communities, but to get engaged in the process of building them. But then that obviously means that that those communities are in touch with places where these products are being built. And that is, when I spoke at the very beginning about democratization of innovation, if we can get, and I think this is happening in Kenya, it's happening in Nigeria, I'm not sure where else, where you have a sizable number of hubs that are not in the major cities. And so there's innovation happening across the country. What could happen perhaps in the case of Chile is that there may be a hub close to where that community is. And if there is, then what I would encourage is linkages to begin to happen there. Because if innovators are building products, they really should be building them with their users in mind. And it's quite likely that the users are within those communities. And so those users should be involved at all stages of that production. So that it shouldn't be that the first time that they're seeing the product is once it's complete. Those hubs or those innovators should be engaging them even at the idea stage, just to make sure that what it is they're trying to build would really be useful for, for nature and other organizations within that community. So I would encourage just for a lot more conversation to happen.
Thank you. And Becky or David, do either of you have anything to add to that question before we move on?
I'm sorry, my connection cut off when you were reading the question. Maybe you could read it again, sorry.
Yes, no problem. The question is, how can grassroots organizations, this question is coming from the CEO of the Action for Nature. So how can grassroots organizations on the continent engage with you three, others in your sector, and become partners to advance and help your technological products to get to the people that these companies work with, who really need these modern innovations?
So I'll say first of all that one of the biggest problems with developing technology-based innovations is that, especially in Africa, where we don't really have a culture of building our own things yet, it's just developing, is people have not yet learned how to accept or how to tolerate a certain level or certain frequency of failure. So failure is part and parcel of technology development. It's part and parcel of development of anything, period, right? And one of the experience that I've had is, when you create something and you try to put it on the market, give it to customers to use, they'll want it to work, perfectly. So one thing that can happen is by helping people or the consumers, basically working with the consumers and help them gain patience in homegrown technology. I think that is one of the biggest things, one of the ways that they could support tech entrepreneurs or tech businesses that are homegrown in Africa. So how do you help the consumers or support the consumers or enable the consumers to consume this technology in such a way that it will support the development and improvement of the quality of the technology without, flipping out and saying, oh, this thing doesn't work, and things like that. The patience, how do you build that patience for consumers so that this reasonable uptake of this technology and, of course, improvement as well.
Thank you, David. Oh,
yeah, I just I want to add a couple of things on that. I completely agree, David, and I think building that feedback culture and agile working method is really important and valuable, because, as you said, failing once doesn't mean you are a failure. It means it's just part of the process to improvement and growth, like you said. And really, within our organization, we have that agile work flow as well, where we, maybe the traditional method is to, okay, do the market research, create a presentation, get the feedback, launch, basically, it all has to happen in tandem with each other. So as you're doing the research, developing the presentation, developing the product, because basically, that's the best way to learn. As as we were talking before, as a student, maybe you spend 4 years in university, kind of in a very learning the principles of your subject matter, but then by the time you graduate, it's not relevant, or it's outdated, or something new has come along. And so the faster you can put your idea or your learnings into practice and really have that real world feedback, the more resilient you'll be, because it won't be such a shock to your system once you do a launch and then suddenly you get an onslaught of feedback. So it's also a way to test your assumptions and really have a that adaptability that really, again, builds the resilience. So I totally echo what you say.
Thank you so much. I want to attempt to kind of merge two questions for you guys to comment on. So the first question comes from Brianna Lawton, and she asks, as an African American who wants to do work in Africa, while kicking off a couple of ventures / nonprofits, how can people like Brianna engage more, connect, and grow while abroad in the States, and with the hopes of living and working in Africa after graduating? So I will start with that question before moving into the second part.
Well, I mean, if I'm going to answer the question, I'm definitely going to pitch hubs because that's that's what I do. That's where I work. I think hubs are a great soft landing for anyone wanting to engage in a local ecosystem. And so I would say just, and the thing is that I haven't experienced any other kind of spaces that's as open as hubs, that are always just willing to hear and interact with people from different parts of the world. The thing is with hubs is that, yes, they're there to support entrepreneurs and within the local context. And so they want African entrepreneurs and innovators to be the best at building solutions for the continent. But the best ideas, the best products have input from different people. And sometimes those different people are not based in those countries, are not based in those communities. And for that reason, hubs are always open to people wanting to engage and so on, and always willing to answer questions. And so perhaps what the person asking the question, one of the things they could do is just reach out to figure out where do you want to go, begin to reach out to hubs in that area. Ask questions around, is anyone doing A and B in this space? This is what I'm looking to do when I come back, and so on. And for sure, those hubs would be willing to engage. The other thing is to join a diaspora network. I know there's diaspora networks for the US, there's some from Europe and so on. And those are always also places where you can find resources on how to engage if you're wanting to engage in Africa. They kind of give you, it's kind of like a map or like a route of who you could do what with. Yeah. So diaspora networks and hubs.
I'll piggyback off of that, and I'll say, get really specific and clear about where it is you want to be, and what space you want to be in and why. This is a huge continent. There's so many opportunities within each country. There's so many different subcultures and languages. In Ethiopia, the national language is Amharic, but there are an estimated more than 80 languages active within the country. And, each has its own kind of cultural history. And then you also layer religion on top of that. So I think the more you can really laser focus where you want to be and finding your why, and then going from there. And it's great to read the New York Times and CNN and BBC and get, world news. But, we're talking today about grassroots solutions. So read news that's locally produced and that's coming out of that space or that industry. The more you can really get the like authentic on the ground voices and, players, in that space, the better informed you'll be, and better positioned to, make a decision, make a leap, when the time comes. And then you'll find when you're here, the learning starts all over again. You can only absorb so much from reading and attending webinars and listening to podcasts and however else you might consume information. But then once you're actually here and you see how it looks, how it smells, what it feels like, it's a totally, rich experience. And so I encourage you to, if you don't already have it in mind, really narrow in on where you want to work in the continent and why, and then kind of build out your roadmap from there. Start, I don't know how active you might be on social media, but start following certain people on Twitter, and just really see what the kind of on the ground, real live conversations are to help you tap into that. And then as Adaeze said, like there's diaspora networks that you can also leverage and tap into and kind of absorb that group knowledge, so that you don't have to start from scratch. I think that's also a risk, that you think you're the first person to have done X, but there's always someone who's done something similar or related, whose experiences you can learn from and then get to where you want to be that much faster. Adaeze has brought up mentorship in hubs a couple of times as being one of the advantages in network building. And, I echo that as well. Finding a mentor who can, give you some years of knowledge to build off of and give you that head start.
Thank you, Becky. David, would you like to contribute?
Sure. I mean, everything that Becky and Adaeze have said is right. You need to build networks. You need to tap into networks. You need to figure out your why, and how and the what. But I think for me, what I've realized is the most important thing is learning how to start small, figuring out how to start small. I think that's one thing that people skip or don't get to understand. Whenever you want to get into something, you can't start big. I mean, even if you have a lot of money, starting big is dangerous. Okay, so what you want is the thing you want the most, in my perspective, is to figure out how to start small. Once you figure out how to start small, then you can, with the building of the networks and finding the right incubator, that will just help you grow. But initially, you need to figure out how can you start small. That's my contribution.
Thank you, all of you. And I think this is like a perfect segment into our final question. And once again, I want to thank all of our attendees for the questions that they've posed that have helped contribute to this lively discussion. So now, going off of what has been talked about in terms of social media engagement, bridging the gap with youth, specifically in terms of mentorship and encouraging that idea to not be afraid to start small, not being afraid to fail. Is there anything else that you guys can add to advice that you would have in terms of how organizations can work with locally based African youth in terms of efficiently bridging the skills gap challenge in their local demographics, especially when compared to to diaspora African youth with access to infrastructure and higher quality of education that they're exposed to? And that'll be our last question before moving into our meet and greet. Thank you.
Wow, that was a long-winded. I mean, Yeah, it was a long question. But I think that the gist of it is how local organizations can leverage the skills outside of Africa. Is that the gist of the question?
Yeah, sorry, I can repeat to kind of concise.
Yes.
So the question verbatim is, how can organizations that work with locally based African youth efficiently bridge the skills gap challenge in their local local demographic? Building off of what's already been mentioned in terms of social media engagement, building membership, etc. Is that more clear?
Yeah, I think so. One of the challenges that I feel we've faced as an ecosystem in Africa is telling our stories. I think we could do a much better job at showcasing what we're able to do, what our skills are. And I mean, it is a concern. I know that there's some hubs that have actually now set up studios within the hub just to begin to encourage innovators to tell their stories, to record their podcasts, to have videos that they can share, that just tell their stories. So the first thing is, these stories have to be told about what people in the continent have been able to do already, and for us to be proud about those stories. And then the second thing is to be open to conversations with people, again, from all over, not just within the continent, but outside of the continent. And it's in having those conversations that you begin to exchange ideas and perhaps even learn more about gaps that you need to fill. And so once these gaps have been identified, then there's now room for other people to plug in that have skills that may be missing on the continent, or that may be missing within products. But I think that the leadership does need to come from the people owning the challenges and owning the solutions, and they need to be better at articulating what challenges that they have. And then the people wanting to plug in those challenges also have to be very assertive around their stories and what their skill is, and how awesome they are, and why these people that have things or gaps that need to be filled in, why they should be looking at them. And I mean, I've been in the tech and innovation space for 10 years now, but even I struggle to articulate what I do and how I do it, and why you want to work with me versus someone else. But I think if you can perfect your pitch, perfect what your skill is and what you bring to a community, what you bring to a challenge, then those connections just, they really tend to be made quite easily. In the tech and innovation space, you find that a lot of times it's not about what you studied, how you studied, what grade you got, but it's about how you present yourself and how you showcase very practically how you're able to plug into a situation.
I very much agree with Nekesa. I mean, the stories are not being told as much as we need them to. I mean, doing something like this, for instance, this is very, very important. You know, so a kid in the diaspora who's still in college or high school, or even studying in Africa, when they see this, there's wisdom that they will get that they otherwise wouldn't have got. You know. And there's a lot of stuff that people learn on the entrepreneurial journey that that other people that are coming after you also have to learn them themselves, and yet they could have heard it from a story and avoided something. So I would certainly also say telling the stories is very important. But I'd also add that there has to be a way in which we can help with the exposure problem. You know, that's for me, that's huge. How can we bridge the skills gap? How can we bring exposure to these people so that they can gain these skills that will help them move forward in this entrepreneurial world or the tech world or whatever it is that they're trying to do in Africa? Because like I mentioned before, we're still young when it comes to certain things, you know, like articulation, for instance, like Esa was saying. I had in the Africa Prize program, we went through a lot of training in articulation. I was like, wow, where did these guys even learn this stuff? You mean you can actually do this? You mean there's this other level of presenting yourself? So you realize that you actually don't know how to present yourself. You know, it's huge. These skills are not lying around everywhere. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to be taught. But how do we share exposure? How do diaspora students share exposure? That's a big question that needs to be answered.
I think going back to something David said earlier, it can be starting small. So if I'm on the side of, I'm just looking at the question again. So you're asking about organizations working with locally based African youth. So if I'm someone within the organization and I recognize that there is a skills gap, say in presentation or confidence or public speaking or something, you know, that would make me hesitate about, you know, potentially hiring this person because they don't have the kind of stage presence of that they'd be able to deliver a presentation to a potential client. The solution can start with you, where you could be a mentor. You can offer a workshop if that is your forte. In fact, if that is something that you see a need for, and that you're in a position to offer that solution. Actually, earlier this year, in February of this year, I led a workshop on personal branding for women. And it was actually at the Gabe offices. It was prior to me officially joining the company. But it was a great opportunity that kind of came out of just a brainstorm and a conversation about the need for this kind of skill and training. It had a great turnout, lots of questions, and it was a really great exercise for me to really engage and move out of a place of, maybe saying, recognizing that it's a problem or a challenge. And then, of course, there was 50 people in that room. There's, millions of young women here in Ethiopia. So I can't get to all of them at once. One workshop is not enough, but it was a start, and it was a concrete kind of, step forward to try to address something that I recognized. And so I would say from an organization's perspective, whether it's you as an individual or a department or as Gabea, offering training programs to try to bridge that skills gap, moving past the stage of just saying, like, recognizing that there's a challenge and then being more solutions oriented is definitely the route that I would recommend if you have the capacity.
Thank you all so much. That was very encouraging to hear, especially as like a youth myself, looking to continue to contribute in the spaces that I can. So thank you all for your answers, and we'll now transition to our meet and greet and bring our selected attendees onto the stage. Thank you.
Hi guys, has everyone joined us on stage who's going to be invited? Are we waiting for others? You're muted.
I just want to remind you that we've brought on to turn on your videos before posing the questions. So I think I'll start with, let's see, Alexander.
Oh, hi. My name is Alexander. I think my question was about, I wanted to ask, maybe this goes to the Kesa, David, and Becky. So as organizations, I'd like to know exactly which culture maybe has contributed much to who you are today. Which culture have you managed to scale up with, if you got me right? And Becky, I'm sorry for spamming your messages on LinkedIn.
I knew I recognized that name. Hi, Alexander. No problem at all. It was not spam. It was great to connect with you there. Okay, good to be connected again. So your question was on which culture has influenced us the most. Is that right?
Yeah. Like for example, I've been working with a team, and we found daily stand-ups and taking daily stand-ups and, for example, like checking up on everyone every week and knowing exactly whether there's someone who is getting a block somewhere. So which culture, or rather company traditions have really contributed to your growth?
Yeah, definitely those practices relevant to startups have been personally and professionally very impactful, including doing the daily stand-ups and the agile work methodology that I talked about earlier. So one of our team members, a senior Scrum Master named Micaiah Jones. She's also a trainer of ours who's taught classes on IT, business analyst, and others. I met her last year, and she really gave me the kind of quick and dirty lowdown version of how she works and how along with her team they work in sprints, which I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but between herself and our product owner, basically they set objectives for every 2 weeks of, here's what the outputs are going to be. And, constantly are checking in on if they're on target or not. And so basically the goal is to not have anything carry over into the next sprint. So yeah, when you think about, that in, or marathon versus a sprint, it's an opportunity to really, again, as I was talking about earlier on the call, make your results time bound and really hold each other accountable, and make sure that there's actually as much energy going into results as there is into, planning, and not kind of getting in this, stuck in the mode of planning and research and analyzing and, trying to solve for every potential problem, but rather just doing it and learning through failing, as we've said again and again on this call. I think initially when you asked your question and you were talking about cultures, I was thinking like a specific country, but now I think I understand you're not asking that. So yeah, for me, the startup culture, like involving all of those different, kind of quick, fast adaptations has been really almost revolutionary. Yeah.
Thank you, Becky. I want to invite, is it SOSA?
Yes.
You got it. Thank you for joining us. You can pose a question to either a specific panelist or just the group in general. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on the event / putting it together. I wanted to first thank the panelists for, I think my question was already answered, the one I posed in the chat, and I wanted to say a big thank you to everyone for speaking to that. I asked that, I guess some context was because I work with a nonprofit organization that's specifically focused on working with African youth. And we found it, we're in the we just had the first cohort of our program. And we had that challenge where compared to the African youth we work with in the Diaspora, the first set of youth we worked back home with, there was a gap. And I feel like we didn't expect to face that challenge. So I think most of what everyone said in terms of when you identify the, I guess, challenge turning into a solution oriented type approach versus, staying there is something we'll definitely take away. And I did kind of look into some of the hubs and things shared. So definitely we'll be reaching out to the panelists, hopefully for follow-up conversations and advice.
Happy to hear that you've been connected and you've been able to make these, find these solutions for the work that you're doing at SOSA. Thank you.
Thank you.
Max, welcome. Would you like to pose your question?
Hi everyone, Max Adaeze here from A, and really good, great panel, great conversation. I think I really don't have a specific question other than I think one that I had before was had been talked about or answered. So the last one I have is actually more around telling our stories or Africa or Africans telling the story of Africa and commanding that narrative versus being on the receiving end of it and having someone else tell our story. So my question is actually probably twofold. One is, how do we, based on what you guys are doing both, how do you envision or see things changing and shifting in a way that enables our youth? So right, so my focus is really on the youth. our youth to take a more deliberate role and a more engaged role in, driving the narrative about what Africa is about and how, right? Because we know most of the youth on the continent is using technology in one way, shape, or form. I know you mentioned it, the number of hubs that have been created, and now some of them shifting from big hubs, big cities to more remote areas. So how do you see that shift happening? And how do you, especially for someone that's in the media space, how do you see us, using that to actually control the narrative and now be on the receiving end of our own story, both on the continent and even more so overseas? One. The second one is more around the hubs, and David, don't let me call you Dave. David, you talked about exposure, and I think that's something that I really would note too with you here. It's, if you don't give someone an opportunity to do something the first time and fail and learn, they'll never get the skill set that they need to do well. What is it that we, when I say we, it's really both on the continent and in the diaspora, what is it we could do effectively based on your experience? So not necessarily from a theoretical perspective, but what do you think we could do to help build up that skill set and provide those opportunities, those first opportunities, where there's very limited, risk, or even when there's risk, the consequences are relatively controlled and no one's losing a job, no customer or client is expecting to have, I don't know, a Google grade product or Apple grade product, but that one student or that one kid, I'm using the term a little loosely in a New York way, that one kid is, it's getting the exposure and change that he needs to be able to perform down the road. So I guess it's two questions. I said it was one, but it's two questions really.
Yeah, I know Max addressed David, but I just wanted to say something before David comes on. And this may also speak to the statement that SOSA made as well. So the thing with, and I'm sure a lot of people have had this quote as well, that entrepreneurship is universal or global, but opportunity, is really specific to where you are. And so even in identifying what we feel are challenges or gaps, I think we also need to be cognizant of those circumstances that particular group of youth are in, and take leadership from them on how they're dealing with those circumstances. And so have they innovated around what you perceive as a challenge? Like if you listen to them, perhaps they've innovated their way around it. Have they found different ways of going about things separate from how youth in diaspora are going about them? So it's different solutions, not just one is better than the other. The second thing that I want to say is, I think the comment was on how youth, how to get them at the forefront, how to get them heard. So it's twofold. On the one hand, we need to stop this narrative of youth are the leaders of the future. The future arrived many years ago, so here they are. It's it's their time, and the rest of us just need to get out of the way. So the first thing to do is get out of the way, but be available for for the mentorship and so on. But also the youth need to step up. We need to hear them, or before we ask to hear them. They need to be right there in our faces, challenging us and asking these questions. And that's one of the things I think that I appreciate the most about this generation, that they will challenge. In both my roles, in my roles this last 10 years, I've worked with people significantly younger than me, and they have kept me on my toes in terms of the things that they demand of an organization that has hired them. And that's what we love, because we need to be kept in touch with the people that we're serving. The final thing I want to say is that, and this interestingly is actually part of the African Union's 2063 agenda. I'm paraphrasing, but really it's about finding our Africanness and being proud of it, right? And so that's another way that we begin to build solutions. We think about our Africanness and what we want to do as Africans to express ourselves and to build solutions for ourselves. And that's another way that the youth can begin to engage, by re-engaging with their identities and finding what they define as African, and then using that as the foundation of building whatever it is that they're looking to build. But this was David's question.
Hey, Max, sorry, I missed a little bit of your question. My internet is funny. Please, could you repeat it?
No worries. I've been Kampala a few times. I know the struggle. So the question, I guess, was around something that you mentioned, which is providing opportunities. I think the phrase, the word that you used was exposure, and the way I see it is providing opportunities to people that wouldn't have it otherwise, to do things that they need to do, have exposure that they need to have in order to be able to deliver down the road and add value to society or communities and whatnot. So what do you see that's worked, right? Especially in bringing the youth towards the tech industry, right? They're already using tech anyways, but using it in a way that's gonna one, elevate their their ability to add value to society, and two, elevate their voice and being able to say, this is what we stand for, this is what we want, and not be passive or maybe expecting, like, I'm originally from Cameroon, so half of the kids want to go and work for the government. So how do we shift that model, right? Like in Europe, I see, I spend a lot of time there, but you have a lot of these hubs in Southeast Asia, a lot of hubs being created, but the hubs have, some of them are created by the government, but the ones that are actually lasting are created by individuals, entrepreneurs. So what is to you, was that not, was the secret there, for you based on your experience, right? Like, I know things are fairly dynamic in Uganda, but what is it that you've seen in Uganda that maybe the whole continent could emulate in order to get more entrepreneurial spirit and youth engaged in getting the skill set that they need, whether it's the technical skill to code or the managerial business acumen to actually run a business or run parts of a business.
Okay,
without it
that's
being
a very
in big cities like Kampala or Nairobi or Adaeze or whatnot, like outside of those big cities.
Yeah,
ideally.
That's a great question. So first and foremost, when you talk about entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial spirit, for me, the entrepreneurial spirit is actually just grit. Okay, so first and foremost, the first ingredient you need is grit. People who don't know when to quit, those usually make good entrepreneurs. So first, you need that. You need to teach the youth that. You need to teach them that, hey, things are going to fail. Things are dynamic. You don't even have anyone near you that has done the kind of thing that you're trying to do. So the grit is going to carry you through. Okay, it's your compass. Secondly, and this worked for us, these people the youth need to take time to study the existing things that are existing that they could learn from. So, for example, us, we were like the first people doing what we're doing around where we are. But then as we things or do things, the kind of things that we're doing, and they do them better. So how do you get
I think we may have lost David.
Yeah, I'm going to make a habit of stealing David's. Here I go again.
Go for it.
I just wanted to add, so an interesting thing that we're doing at AfriLabs now is we are taking innovators through a business simulator. And so basically it's a safe environment where we pose different challenges. So for example, you're right now facing a pandemic. What would you do? How do you manage these finances? What do you do with your products, et cetera, et cetera? And what should come out of it at the end is that they now have a better sense of how to navigate challenges or pandemics or whatever could come up, and they're able to make really good decisions and make really good strategies. Right. And so their businesses don't suffer. It's all make believe, but they're really critical lessons that are learned. And I think perhaps even as you think about contextualizing for the African continent, we basically have to figure out what do the youth within Africa need to learn and try and create an environment where they can learn it safely. I don't know if that's a role for hubs or a role for universities or lower grade primary schools, but I think it's really important to begin to condition the youth in that way. Constantly throw them into environments where they can think critically what they'll do in real life, because it's only then that they begin to get a sense of how to really navigate this big bad world. Yeah.
Thank you, Nikesa. I like it. I like it a lot. I don't think Dave would mind you taking his part of it, taking that every now and then. Sorry.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I realize that we still have more people in the meet and greet segment, but unfortunately, we've run out of time. So we don't want to keep people waiting. We will do the wrap up. I think it's okay if anyone wants to stay. They can continue the conversation, but just from our end, would like to thank everyone for joining. Thank you for joining the webinar. At DOWA, we're pleased to have a lot of collaboration in this space in Africa, and this is an opportunity for us to get to know what everyone is doing out there and get to engage. So I'm really very grateful that we're having that engagement right now. So thank you to all the panelists, and thank you to our attendees as well. Unfortunately, Jeannie from Facebook couldn't join us. He had to pull out at the last minute, but we've had a very engaging session, and we're grateful to everyone who's participated, especially with the questions that are coming and with this meet and greet and additional questions. One of the things that we're trying to do at DOWA is to connect the students in the diaspora to what is happening on the continent. So this has been a very fascinating conversation, and I can see that with that conversation, people are thinking, students are thinking, what can we do? And more importantly, how can we do it? And a lot of the things that have been talked about, that we've talked about during this webinar about, the need for the talents, the need for collaboration, understanding the local market, the context, how things operate, and who to reach out to, what the role of the hub is, what the role of SME forums are, different ways of engagement, being aware of what the policies are about. I remember David saying that about there are policies that favor entrepreneurs, but many people don't even know about them. And also issues around, if you're a social entrepreneur, how do you engage? How do you access grants and things like that? So we hope to be able to carry on conversations like this to bring people together, talk about how we are addressing the challenges on the continent. As Nikesa said, it's time for the youth to come on board, and we're going to be pushed out of the way. And Nikesa, we realize that I think that is happening a lot right now, and it's good that we're in that bit, in that space that we can collaborate. I will leave you with the last bit of what everybody has said about telling our stories. It's important for us to tell our stories. We're doing this through our webinars, but we encourage everyone to tell these stories. Every opportunity you have, tell the story, the African way, what we're doing and what we have to do. I think that with avenues like this, with people coming to do internships at, through DOWA and other opportunities, we can all collaborate and change the narrative about Africa. But please, let's continue to tell our stories. Thank you, everyone, for participating, and thank you for joining. I think we will stay on if we want to carry on the conversation as well. Thank you so much.